Good morning. I am excited to share with you a deck that I just received in the mail yesterday. This is one that I kickstarted. This is the Poesis Oracle by Andrea Wan. We can see this beautiful black two-portion box. And I'm filming this in the morning, so I do have quite a bit of shadow. I'm sorry about that. But I didn't want to wait until later to film this. So what intrigued me about this deck was that it's an oracle deck that corresponds with poetry. And I thought that was a really interesting way to provide meanings to the cards. Unfortunately, the poetry is only stored on the website. And so I am going to have to go and print out basically a homemade guidebook. But here's the website, poesisoracle.com. The poetry is by Megan King. And if you've watched my videos before, you know that I do not purchase and I don't read very frequently with oracle decks. They don't call to me very strongly. I just, I don't know, most of them leave me pretty cold, but I do have a handful of them, and the ones that I really like. And this was a deck that really intrigued me. Here is the title card. We'll set it aside. So let's begin a flip through and think about what we have got right now. The cards do not have a heavy finish. They have a slight gloss finish. They're a little heavier than I expected, actually. They're not super heavy, but I think they feel just very slightly heavier than mass market, maybe. But they don't have a heavy finish, and so I hesitate to call them cheap, but they feel a little fragile. There is something vintage about these cards, something a little bit old-fashioned. They remind me of this older set of Rider-Waite-Smith cards that I received actually as a gift. This deck was from probably the mid-70s, and someone who had owned them for a long time gave them to me. and they had this wonderful worn-in quality that newer decks just don't have. You have to earn that quality rightly, as it's said, by a lot of shuffling, a lot of handling. And this deck really reminds me of that. The cards are smooth and soft, and like I said, they have that fragile feeling without exactly feeling cheap, and that's an interesting balance to encounter. In this kind of publication effort. And I think that's a very interesting choice. And I do think it was a very deliberate choice, because the white of the cards is not pure white. It's not stark white. It's a slight gray is not quite the right word. It's an aged white. It's like paper that has hung out for decades. And that softens the black a little bit, because I do feel like this is a pure black, and the black is actually quite nice. But it feels very soft, very inviting. This is a very inviting deck, actually. I have a real personal fondness for black and white illustration, but I do not own a lot of black and white decks. I do own the Arcane Bullshit Oracle, and of course postcards from Infinite Space, and I've owned other black and white decks. I owned Victoria Regina when it was first published, and I have zero idea what happened to that deck. Like none. It was so long ago. Yeah, I've owned a number of black and white decks over the years. But I find that my enjoyment of black and white illustration more generally, oh, that's cool, I like this one, it does not really translate into my, into a proclivity for black and white decks, because I don't find the same, I don't know, I find a lot of black and white decks harder to like, and maybe that's just because I don't resonate with the artist styles, or maybe I just really like my cartomacy decks to be full color. I don't know what that is. But finding a black and white deck that I really like just kind of presses multiple buttons for me at once, and that's kind of interesting. When it all happens at the same time. This is the image that we found on the inside of the folded insert. So I really do think that I'm going to enjoy reading with this. I wish that, and maybe there is an actual guidebook with the poetry, but I find it inconvenient that I have to refer to the website for the associated poetry. And I guess it's entirely reasonable to read this intuitively using just the keyword and the image to go off of. But it's the Poesis Oracle. It's, poetry was baked into the deck and how it functions and what it means. And I think it would be shortchanging myself to work with the deck without utilizing the poetry at least sometimes, and to get to know the deck without getting to know the poetry alongside with it. So I will look into the availability of a guidebook, or perhaps just print my own. Because I think this is a really interesting deck, and I feel very motivated to read with it and explore it and see how it reads with clients and how clients respond to it. Because I think it really actually has a lot to say and a lot of really interesting potential. And something else that I like about this deck and about the other Oracle decks that I tend to enjoy the most is that it has a lot of cards, which means honestly, on just the most practical level, it's very easy to shuffle. Oracle decks that have fewer than a playing cards deck worth of cards are not easy for me to shuffle. And yes, you can kind of hold them like this and do the mixing this way, but I actually find that kind of mixing very uncomfortable, and I'm not very good at it, actually. And I suppose it's just a matter of practice. Oh, that's amazing. That's a fear card. That's cool. Excuse me. But decks that don't have a lot of cards are a little hard for me to mix in a satisfactory way. And I feel like I'm not getting the kind of randomized mix that gives a really satisfactory reading to people. And I feel like the same cards are showing up over and over and over again. And I guess in some ways that's fine. But if there's only, say, 20 or 25 or 27 cards, that's not a lot. If I'm using those same 25 cards for a lot of people, it kind of starts to feel like they're getting the same messages, like all of them are getting the same messages. And as a reader, I feel like I'm doing something wrong, like are the messages not coming through clearly? And it's a little strange, honestly. It always starts to feel a little strange when there's not a lot of cards to work with. And so having a satisfying number of cards to work with is good for both the practical aspect of, hey, can I shuffle this comfortably? Can I mix them up to get a good randomized mixture? And also from the more, esoteric art of it, of am I getting a satisfying message? Is the message coming through clearly? That's cool. And of course, it's always absolutely possible to go too far in the opposite direction. And this is where, as much as I love the Oracle of Arcane Bullshit, it has so many cards, and as an art object, it's fitting that it should have an unreasonably large number of cards. Like, you cannot hold this deck and shuffle it. Oh, that's so cool with the bones. That's gorgeous. Yeah, that deck, you cannot shuffle it. It's chunky. It's so big. It's very silly. Yeah. And the True Black Tarot, gosh, that deck, I like it a lot, but it is over-engineered, and it's too big for my poor little hands to get around. And it becomes too much tarot, not enough deck. Wow. And that is the end. We have seen the fully reversible backs. I like those backs. So yeah, there is the Poesis Oracle. It's a lightweight deck, without a heavy finish. It is quite lightweight. And I do think that some people will find it feeling cheap. That is not exactly what I feel. I feel like it is very slightly fragile in the way that vintage things sometimes feel. And whether or not that was a very carefully chosen artistic choice, or, a cost-saving choice, I think it's difficult to say. But accidental or not, I think it's kind of appealing, honestly. And I absolutely don't want a lot of my decks like this. But for this deck, it gives it this wonderful broken-in feeling. There you go. That reminds me of tarot decks that have been used and loved and shuffled a lot and read with a lot. And I find that really, really interesting and pleasant and enjoyable. So it shuffles fine. It's brand new, so it's stiff, and, I have that hand issue, so I always do struggle with the shuffle. But you know, it warms up, it shuffles fine, gives you a nice riffle. Nothing real surprising there. Oh gosh, I do just want to sit and play with cards all day, I'll tell you. I cannot play with the cards all day, much as I want to. But I'll see what this sweet oracle has to say to me this morning. Thank you for sticking with me on this channel. I have a backlog of like 4 decks to talk about, and these videos have been sitting on my hard drive saying, hey, are you gonna edit us? And I'm like, probably. So by the time this goes up, the other videos may be very well also on the channel or very shortly after. But all of the decks that I kick-started last year arrived. And I also got a copy of the Fyodor Pavlov tarot that we've all been anxiously waiting for. I did not actually kickstart that deck. I missed it. That was like during a short period where I was like, no, I can't possibly support any other decks. I need to save money, because we all go through that period. And then we miss, you know, the decks we've been waiting for. And so I had to wait even more patiently and even more carefully to grab a deck from the artist's sale, you know, because he put them up on his web shop. And so I did get a deck, and I did a walkthrough, and then I made the video of the walkthrough, and it was fine. You know, it's a absolutely gorgeous deck, and we all want one, and we all rightly should, because it's gorgeous and it's lovely and it's a wonderful deck. But then I started reading it, and I had very different impressions of it than I did when I walked through. And I want to do a second video, a different video than just oh, here's all the cards. Because you know what? There's a bunch of videos on YouTube that are just people showing you, oh, here's all the cards. I want to do something different, because after having read with it a number of times, okay, fine, thank you. Soul, here we go. Are we a body inside a soul, or are we a soul inside a body? Are we the network that connects us? I suppose we are both. I suppose we are both. Message, soul, interconnected. And of course, because I'm filming on my phone, I can't just pull up the poem, but it does seem like a rather lovely image to think about going forward right now. A rather lovely gesture from this deck. And I'm grateful to it. I'm excited to have this friend in my life, and I look forward to using this tool. So thank you for joining me, and thank you to this deck. I welcome it into my life, and I hope that it enjoys its time with me, however long that might